Number 7 on this list is Nissan. And if that surprised you, good, because that's exactly the reaction we're going for. Nissan doesn't get talked about in the reliability conversation. Toyota does. But the data tells a different story, and we're about to walk through all 7 brands one at a time, starting from the bottom. Here's something most car buyers never stop to question. Everyone repeats buy a Toyota like it's settled science, and honestly, it's not bad advice. Toyota builds solid vehicles, but repeating advice enough times turns it into a rule nobody bothers checking anymore, and that's a problem, because there are 7 brands sold in America right now that either match Toyota's reliability numbers or cost noticeably less when something actually breaks. Some do both. The brand sitting at number 1 on this list is going to catch people off guard, mostly because nobody expects it. It's not a household reliability name in most conversations. It's not the brand people brag about at a barbecue, but the numbers behind it are hard to argue with. Quick disclosure before we go further. This channel doesn't take money from manufacturers. Nobody's sending us press vehicles, nobody's buying ad space to soften what we say, and we don't sell cars. What you're getting is pulled straight from published repair cost and reliability data, and we'll walk you through exactly which source each number comes from. One favor, and it costs you nothing. Tap subscribe before we keep going. It's the kind of 5-second habit that saves somebody you know from overpaying for a name on a windshield. Now, where these numbers actually come from, because this matters more than people think. We're pulling from RepairPal's Repair-Driven Reliability Index, which builds its score from real shop data instead of owner opinion surveys, plus independent repair cost tracking that looks at actual dollars spent per year, per brand. We're not cherry-picking one study that happens to agree with the title. Different studies rank brands differently depending on what they measure, and we'll be upfront every time a number leans on one particular source instead of a universal consensus. If a stat is close or contested, we'll say so instead of pretending it's settled. Nissan spent the better part of the last decade with a reputation problem, mostly thanks to a run of CVT transmissions in the mid-2010s that failed early and gave the whole brand a black eye it's still shaking off in casual conversation. That reputation, though, is increasingly out of date. In recent independent scoring that weighs owner complaints, repair costs, and recall severity, Nissan actually lands ahead of Toyota, even if only by a narrow margin. The newer Altima, Rogue, and Sentra generations have addressed a lot of the transmission concerns that drag the brand down, and Nissan's parts pricing tends to run cheaper than Toyota's across most common repairs, because Nissan dealers and independents alike compete harder on labor and parts pricing to win back customers who left during the CVT years. The honest caveat here: if you're looking at anything from roughly 2013 to 2018 with the older CVT, that's still a real risk, and you want documented maintenance history before you buy. But a recent Nissan serviced properly is no longer the gamble it used to be, and it's proof that reputations lag behind actual engineering by several years in both directions. This is actually the most important pattern in the entire list, and it's worth naming before we go any further, because it repeats itself in almost every entry that follows. A brand's reputation is built over roughly a decade, and it changes at a completely different speed than the actual engineering underneath the hood. Nissan earned its transmission reputation between about 2012 and 2018, and that reputation is still doing damage to resale values and buyer perception today, years after the underlying hardware was fixed. The opposite thing happens with brands people trust blindly. Toyota earned its reputation across the 1990s and 2000s with genuinely bulletproof engines, and that reputation is still cashing checks today, even in years where a competitor's data has quietly pulled ahead. If you only shop by brand reputation instead of checking current data on the specific model year you're looking at, you're making a decision based on information that might be 5 to 10 years out of date without realizing it. Number 6, Lexus. Yes, it's a luxury brand, and no, that doesn't disqualify it here. People assume luxury automatically means expensive to keep running, and with most luxury brands, that assumption is correct. Lexus breaks the pattern, and it breaks it on purpose. Lexus takes proven Toyota platforms and engines, the same architecture underneath a Camry or a RAV4, and builds them to a tighter tolerance with better materials, without switching to the small turbocharged engines that have made a lot of modern luxury brands more failure-prone. In independent reliability scoring, Lexus consistently sits at or near the top of every list it appears on, ahead of Toyota itself in several of them, which makes sense once you realize Lexus is essentially Toyota engineering with a stricter quality bar and no cost-cutting pressure. The parts and labor picture is the surprising part. Because Lexus shares so much hardware with Toyota, the parts pipeline is enormous, and there's a large national network of independent Toyota and Lexus specialists who charge a fraction of dealer labor rates for identical work. So you end up with a car that drives and feels like a luxury vehicle, badge and interior included, while behaving like a mainstream car every time it needs a service. The one thing to budget for on an older hybrid Lexus, particularly the RX, is that the hybrid battery pack ages on every unit eventually, but specialist shops can recondition individual modules for a fraction of a dealer replacement. So it's a manageable cost rather than a nightmare bill. Number 5. Mazda, the brand that refused to follow the industry off a cliff. While most manufacturers spent the last 15 years bolting small turbochargers onto every engine to hit fuel economy targets on paper, Mazda mostly didn't. Their Skyactiv engines stayed naturally aspirated with larger displacement instead, and that decision alone eliminates some of the most expensive repair categories in the entire industry. No turbo means no turbo failure, which is routinely a 4-figure repair on other brands. Timing chains instead of belts mean no scheduled cam belt replacement job, provided oil changes stay on schedule. Independent repair cost data backs this up directly, with Mazda consistently posting some of the lowest average annual repair costs of any mainstream brand, right in the same range as Honda and Toyota, while its reliability scoring frequently edges past Toyota's in the same studies. The CX-5 and Mazda 3 show up near the top of reliability tables year after year, and it's not an accident. It's a direct result of choosing simpler mechanical layouts over chasing horsepower per liter bragging rights. The one thing to watch for is older Mazdas, roughly 2010 to 2012, which had a genuine rust problem around the rear wheel arches that the brand has since fixed at the manufacturing level. Anything from that window is worth a flashlight underneath before you buy. Outside of that window, a naturally aspirated Mazda is one of the quietest, cheapest ownership experiences in the country, and almost nobody talks about it because Mazda doesn't have the marketing budget to make noise about it. Quick favor before we get to the top 3, because these are the ones that are going to generate the most comments. If this has been useful so far, hit that like button. Takes 2 seconds, costs you nothing, and it puts this list in front of somebody who's about to overpay for a name instead of checking the numbers. Number 4, Hyundai. Proof that a brand can completely rebuild its reputation inside a decade. 10 years ago, nobody would have put Hyundai anywhere near a list like this, and the brand knows it, which is part of why their warranty coverage is as aggressive as it is. Hyundai backs new vehicles with a coverage period that runs well past what most competitors offer, and it applies with unlimited mileage rather than a mileage cap, which matters enormously if you're someone doing serious highway miles rather than short errands. A driver putting on 30,000 miles a year burns through a typical mileage-capped warranty in under 2 years. On Hyundai's structure, mileage isn't the limiting factor at all. The engineering underneath has genuinely closed the gap with Toyota over the last several model generations. Independent reliability data shows Hyundai posting repair costs in a similar range to Kia, its sister brand, and both brands now score competitively against the Japanese leaders on frequency of repair, even if they haven't fully matched them on long-term durability over 10+ years yet. The honest scar here is real. There was a well-documented run of engine-bearing problems in Hyundai and Kia models from the mid-2010s that resulted in major recalls and extended warranty programs across both brands. If you're shopping anything from that window, get paperwork proving the recall work was completed. No paperwork, walk away. The current generation of engines has moved past that issue, and the combination of low repair costs and unmatched mileage coverage makes a recent Hyundai a genuinely smart buy rather than a compromise pick. Number 3, Kia. The same story as Hyundai, with one difference that actually beats it. Kia and Hyundai share ownership, share platforms, and share a lot of the same recent engineering history, including that same bearing-related recall scar from the mid-2010s. What separates Kia on this list is its warranty structure, which runs even longer than Hyundai's in years, and critically, transfers to the next owner when the car is sold. Think about what that actually means at resale. A 3-year-old Kia still has years of manufacturer coverage remaining, and whoever buys it from you inherits that coverage, which means they're willing to pay you more for the car than they would for a competitor with expired coverage. That warranty is quietly working in your favor on the day you sell, not just the day you buy. On the repair side, independent cost data puts Kia in a similar band to Hyundai and just slightly above Honda and Toyota, but the frequency of repairs needed is where Kia pulls ahead of Toyota in several current studies. Mechanically, Kias are straightforward. Sensible layouts, no exotic components hidden behind 6 other parts, and a parts supply chain shared across millions of Hyundai Kia vehicles on American roads, which keeps prices down at any independent shop. Buy new or buy recent, keep the service book stamped so the warranty coverage stays valid, and you end up with more manufacturer protection than Toyota offers as standard, for less money up front. There's a psychological angle to Kia's position that's worth naming directly. For a long time, Kia carried a stigma as the budget option, the brand you settled for rather than chose, and some of that perception still lingers even though the underlying product has changed dramatically. What's actually happened is that Kia used its underdog status as leverage. Instead of competing on prestige, which it couldn't win against established luxury names, Kia competed on value delivered per dollar, packing in more standard equipment, more safety technology, and more warranty coverage than brands twice its price point. That strategy takes years to pay off in public perception, and Kia is still in the middle of that shift. Which means, for now, you're getting the benefit of genuinely improved engineering at a price and reputation that hasn't fully caught up yet. That gap won't last forever. Buying into it now, while the badge is still underpriced relative to what it delivers, is exactly the kind of decision that looks obvious in hindsight 5 years from now. Number 2. Acura. Honda's luxury arm and the brand that makes the strongest case that complexity, not badge, is what actually costs you money. Acura takes Honda's mechanical foundation, specifically the K-Series and J-Series engine families that have spent 3 decades earning a reputation as some of the most durable powertrains ever mass-produced, and wraps them in a more upscale package without piling on the failure-prone technology that drags down most luxury competitors. In RepairPal's Repair-Driven Reliability Index, which builds its score from actual shop data rather than owner surveys, Acura lands in second place overall, with every model line earning an excellent rating, driven specifically by a very low probability of a severe, expensive repair. That's a different thing than simply breaking down less often. It means when something does go wrong, it tends to be minor rather than catastrophic. The TLX and RDX are the models doing most of the heavy lifting in that data, both landing in the top tier of overall reliability scoring. Because Acura shares its parts ecosystem with Honda, one of the largest vehicle parts networks in the country, availability and pricing behave like a mainstream brand rather than a boutique luxury one. You get badge prestige and a genuinely nicer interior than the Honda equivalent, without inheriting the 4-figure surprise bills that come standard with most German luxury ownership. If there's a catch, it's that Acura's lineup is smaller and less flashy than its European competitors, which is exactly why it doesn't get talked about as often as it should. And now, number 1, Honda. The most talked about reliable brand in casual conversation, and yet somehow still underrated by the actual data. Here's the part that should end the debate. In independent repair cost tracking, Honda posts the lowest average annual repair cost of any mainstream brand sold in America, coming in below Toyota, below Kia, below Hyundai, below Mazda. In RepairPal's Repair-Driven Reliability Index for the current model year, Honda takes the top overall spot, ahead of every brand on this list, including Toyota, which dropped out of the top tier entirely in that same study. The HR-V, Fit, Civic, and Accord all land in the top 20 most reliable vehicles overall, and Honda's strong showing across the board is driven specifically by very low annual repair costs, not just infrequent visits to the shop. The engineering explanation is almost boring in how simple it is. Honda's naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engines, particularly the K-Series family, use a timing chain instead of a belt, avoid unnecessary turbocharging on their most popular models, and rely on fuel injection systems that don't carbon up the way some of the more clever systems on competing brands do over time. It's not flashy engineering. It's engineering that avoids adding failure points in the first place, and the repair data reflects that directly. There is one honest caveat worth knowing before you buy. When a Honda does need a significant repair, the bill can sting more than the low annual average suggests, because Honda's dealer network has gotten smaller in recent years, which reduces competition on labor pricing in some regions. The fix is simple. Find an independent Honda specialist rather than defaulting to the dealer, and the pricing advantage shows up immediately. On any four-wheel drive CR-V, get the rear differential fluid changed on schedule. It requires a specific fluid that most owners never bother replacing, and skipping it is one of the few genuinely expensive mistakes you can make on an otherwise famously cheap car to own. It's worth sitting with why this result feels surprising at all, because that reaction says more about marketing than it does about engineering. Toyota has spent decades building a reputation as the default safe choice, and that reputation is largely earned. But reputation and current data are two different things, and they don't always move at the same speed. A brand can coast on a decade-old perception long after a competitor has quietly closed the gap or overtaken it entirely, simply because nobody goes back and rechecks the assumption. Honda didn't need a marketing campaign to become the most repair-efficient mainstream brand in the country this year. It just kept building the same kind of unglamorous, over-engineered economy cars it's always built, while a chunk of the car-buying public was still repeating advice that quietly stopped being the full picture years ago. So there's the full list. Nissan, Lexus, Mazda, Hyundai, Kia, Acura, and Honda, each beating Toyota on a different piece of the puzzle, whether that's raw reliability scoring, annual repair cost, warranty coverage, or all three at once. None of this means Toyota is a bad choice. Toyota remains an excellent, dependable brand by nearly every measure, and if you already own one, none of this is a reason to sell it. What it does mean is that just buy a Toyota stopped being the whole answer years ago, and most people never got the memo because nobody bothered updating it. Here's the one thing worth doing before you buy anything, regardless of which brand you land on. Learn to check your own oil once a month. Engine cold, car on level ground, pull the dipstick, wipe it clean, put it back in, pull it out again, and actually look at it under decent light. Check three things. The level, because low oil is the quietest killer on any engine and most people never notice until a warning light comes on. The texture, because oil that feels gritty between your fingers means metal is already wearing somewhere upstream. And the color, because oil that looks milky, like coffee with too much creamer in it, means coolant is getting into places it shouldn't, which is a head gasket problem waiting to become an engine replacement. 2 minutes with a paper towel once a month on any car, any brand, and you'll catch expensive problems while there's still cheap ones. Which one of these surprised you the most? Tell us in the comments and tell us what you're actually driving and how it's treated you, because real ownership experience is worth more to the next person watching than anything pulled from a spreadsheet. If this helped you think differently about your next purchase, hit like and subscribe, because we're breaking down a new list just like this one every single week. Before you go, there's one thing worth adding to everything we just covered, because it's the question we get asked more than any other after a list like this. If reliability and repair cost matter this much, why doesn't everybody just buy from these 7 brands and call it a day? The honest answer is that reliability data tells you what tends to happen across thousands of vehicles. It doesn't tell you what happens to your specific car. 2 identical vehicles, same year, same trim, same factory, can age completely differently depending on how they were driven and maintained in the first few years of their life. That's not a reason to ignore the data. It's a reason to treat it as a starting point instead of a guarantee. Here's what actually matters more than the brand badge, and almost nobody talks about it. Service history beats brand reputation every single time. A 10-year-old Toyota with gaps in its maintenance records and a mystery about who owned it for years, 3 and 4 is a riskier buy than a 5-year-old Kia with a complete stamped service book and one careful owner. The data we walked through today is built on averages across an entire brand's lineup. Your individual car isn't an average. It's one specific vehicle with its own specific history. And that history is sitting right there in the paperwork if the seller has it, or conspicuously missing if they don't. So here's a habit worth building into every used car search from now on, regardless of which brand you end up choosing. Before you even go look at a car in person, ask the seller for the full service history, and pay attention to how they react to that question. A seller with nothing to hide answers it immediately and has the paperwork ready, sometimes before you even finish asking. A seller who gets vague, changes the subject, or tells you the records are somewhere, is telling you something important without saying a word. That hesitation is data too, and it's worth more than any statistic in this video. One more thing, and this one costs you nothing but a few minutes before you ever set foot on a lot. Pull the vehicle history report yourself using the VIN and check it against what the seller is telling you. Look specifically for salvage titles, flood damage, and odometer discrepancies, because those three things quietly wreck the value and safety of an otherwise perfectly ordinary car from any brand on this list, Toyota included. A clean-looking Honda with a flood title in its past is a worse buy than almost anything else we covered today, no matter how good Honda's average numbers are. Now, a quick favor before we wrap this up completely, separate from the like and subscribe we already asked for earlier. If you found this useful, do us one more solid. Leave a comment telling us which brand you currently drive, and be honest about how it's actually treated you, good or bad. We read every single comment on these videos, and real ownership stories from real people watching this channel are genuinely more valuable to the next viewer than any spreadsheet we could pull up. If enough of you do this, we'll put together a follow-up video built entirely from your comments, brand by brand, and shout out the stories that stood out the most. We also want to hear the disagreements. If you think we got a brand wrong, ranked something too high or too low, or you've got a story that contradicts what the data says, say so. We're not precious about this list, and we'd genuinely rather hear from people who've had a Nissan CVT fail on them at 60,000 miles than pretend the data is the whole story. That kind of feedback makes the next video better, and honestly, it makes us better at this too. If you're new here, this channel breaks down what's actually happening with cars, prices, and dealerships in plain English, without any manufacturer paying us to say nice things, and without any dealership paying us to steer you toward a lot. We dig through the actual data, the actual numbers, and the actual fine print, so you don't have to. New videos come out every single week, covering everything from which cars are sitting unsold and ripe for a discount, to which brands are quietly outperforming their reputation, to the specific things dealers hope you never ask about before you sign anything. So if any of that sounds useful to you, hit subscribe right now before you close this video and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. It genuinely costs you nothing. It takes about 2 seconds, and it's the single biggest thing that helps a small channel like this one keep going and keep putting out videos instead of manufacturers and dealerships being the only ones talking about cars. Thank you for sticking with us through this whole list. We know there's no shortage of car content out there competing for your time, and the fact that you spent these minutes here means a lot more than any view count on a dashboard. We'll see you in the next one.